It was the sort of case that could unravel a lesser man's mind. Scotland Yard's summons had arrived mid-morning, while Holmes was pacing restlessly about the sitting room at Baker Street, craving diversion. Prisoner escaped from a locked cell. He read, tossing the telegram toward me. No exit, no window, no trickery. Curious. He smiled faintly. Shall we go see the impossible? Watson. The prison in question was Coldstone Gaol, a grim, slate-grey institution perched on the outskirts of Wandsworth. A fortress more than a jail. It boasted walls 12 feet thick and guards reputed for their loyalty. The wardens were already flustered when we arrived, and no wonder. Their entire system of order had been breached by something they could not explain. Name was Gilbert Lyle. The governor told us, a thick-set man with a perpetually twitching moustache. Convicted 3 weeks ago of fraud and attempted murder. Quiet fellow, no visitors, no friends. And now, vanished. He led us through echoing stone corridors to a cell that seemed utterly ordinary, a small cot, a metal basin, and a narrow barred window too high for any man to reach, much less escape through. The door, reinforced with iron bolts, had been locked from the outside and had shown no sign of tampering. Holmes crouched beside the cot, examining the floor, then the walls, then finally the door. And he was seen last when? He asked. Last evening, supper was passed through the panel. The governor replied. He returned the tray. At lights out, guard walked by, saw him lying on the cot. This morning, cell was empty, bolts undisturbed. No sign of a break. No disturbance in the cell block overnight? Holmes asked. Known. Every other prisoner accounted for. Not a sound out of place. Holmes examined the cot once more. I saw his brow twitch slightly, then go smooth again. He did not speak as he stepped to the basin, dipped his finger, and sniffed. Water's still, he murmured. Suggests no struggle, no recent use. Curious. What of the tray from last night? He asked. We were led to the kitchens, where Holmes examined the untouched crust of bread and spooned stew residue left behind. After a sniff, he frowned. Bitter almond. There's your first answer, Watson. Poison? I asked, startled. Traces of cyanide in the stew. Enough to fake a death-like state. I suspect, not enough to kill. But why? To stage his own death? No, Holmes muttered. The guards claim they saw him lying on the bed. That would only have worked if he had accomplices. But the locked door, We returned to the cell. Holmes inspected the walls more closely, tapping at the stonework with a slender cane. On the far wall, near the basin, his cane made a duller sound. He paused. I saw his eyes narrow. Governor, he said, has this cell always been in this condition? No renovations. No plumbing repairs. Not that I know of. It's been untouched for years. Holmes knelt by the base of the wall and scraped delicately with his knife. A flake of stone peeled back, revealing, of all things, plaster painted to resemble masonry. Artificial, Holmes muttered. A crude attempt, but under dim prison lighting. Likely sufficient. He turned to us. There's a cavity behind this. Likely used to conceal the man's body, or to allow his exit. We must see what lies behind this wall. With the governor's permission, we summoned tools and removed the false panel. Behind it, a narrow tunnel revealed itself, cramped and earthy, carved meticulously through decades of damp stone. Holmes crawled through without hesitation, and I followed, though I could scarcely breathe in the closeness. The tunnel bent downward slightly, then curved around until it emerged. Incredibly, behind the furnace in the prison's boiler room, Holmes stood, brushing soot from his coat. There's your exit. Hidden, primitive, but effective. But how did he know about it? I asked. That, Watson, is what makes the case. Holmes's voice was tight with thought. This passage was not in any prison records. Certainly not. The governor replied. And yet Mr. Lyle knew of it, exploited it, and timed his escape to the moment his simulated death would buy him just enough hours to vanish. The only clue left behind in the tunnel was a single playing card, curled and stained with soot. The jack of clubs. Holmes stared at it for a long moment before pocketing it. We emerged from the boiler room to find the staff in an uproar. A guard had just found Lyle's prison uniform folded neatly in the laundry chute. No other garments were missing. He walked out dressed as someone else, Holmes deduced. A staff member, likely a laundry worker. We must identify all employees who had access to uniforms last night. The search was immediate, but already Holmes's mind had moved ahead. In the carriage back to Baker Street, he sat in a trance. The tunnel, he said finally, was not new. It predated Lyle. He must have known of its existence long before arriving. But how? Because he designed it, Watson. I stared. You mean, he built the tunnel? Not physically. But I recall the name now. Gilbert Lyle was an architect. Once worked for the firm that refurbished Coldstone 20 years ago. He would have had access to the original structural blueprints, may even have included the cavity himself. Good Lord! Holmes nodded grimly. He went to prison with a plan already in motion. Poisoned his food to feign death. Slipped into the tunnel when guards weren't watching. Disguised himself. Walked out unnoticed. And the card. A message. The jack of clubs. A trickster. He's telling us this is only the beginning. We sat in silence. The prisoner had escaped without leaving, but Holmes now knew the direction of his steps. 2 days later, the newspapers screamed of the vanishing convict and Coldstone Gaol's disgrace. Holmes remained unbothered by the headlines. Instead, he spent the morning bent over a sheaf of architectural drawings obtained through a connection at the Public Works Department. The blueprints, spread across our sitting room floor, showed an older face of Coldstone, one not entirely matching the prison's current configuration. There, Holmes said quietly, pointing to a shaded section near the southeast wall. The boiler room and beneath it, a drainage tunnel leading to the old coal delivery shaft. Long sealed off. Or so they claimed. You believe Lyle used it? I believe it was one of several contingencies. But he didn't vanish into darkness. No man stages such a thing without an after plan. We were interrupted by Inspector Lestrade, who arrived looking unusually ruffled. A stack of reports clutched under his arm. We've tracked the uniform, Holmes. The set Lyle left behind was the right size for a man 5'9". The laundry roster shows only one such individual on duty that night. A new man, James Crick, hired 2 weeks before the escape. Holmes raised an eyebrow. New hire. Vetted. Not thoroughly. Falsified references. And here's the crux. He's disappeared. Left his room the morning after the escape. Never returned. Lodging house keeper says he paid in advance, didn't leave a trace. Then Crick never existed, Holmes said flatly. A persona, likely assumed by Lyle Clever. He built a false identity, used it to infiltrate. Then shed it like a snake's skin the moment it served its purpose. Lestrade dropped the reports with a groan. It's the devil's own puzzle. Not quite, Holmes murmured. He left something behind. The card, the jack of clubs. Lestrade scoffed. That's hardly a clue. Holmes's eyes narrowed. On the contrary, it is a declaration. Later that day, we visited Coldstone once more. Holmes wanted another look, not at the cell, nor the tunnel, but at the guards. One by one, they were paraded past us, gruff, tight-lipped men with rigid expressions and rigid habits. Holmes watched each with a distant, unreadable gaze. Then came a youngish fellow, fidgeting with the brim of his cap. Holmes leaned forward. "Your name?" "Turner, sir." "You were on duty the night of the escape?" "I did rounds at lights out." Lyle was on his cot, motionless. "Did he breathe?" The guard blinked. "Sir, did he breathe?" Holmes repeated calmly. "I didn't get too close, sir. He was still. I thought him asleep. Or dead." Holmes pressed. I suppose." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "You didn't alert anyone?" "No concern." The man flushed. "Beg pardon, sir, but we were told not to disturb the prisoners at night unless there was noise or alarm." Holmes turned to me, satisfied. "There's your blind spot, Watson." They assumed what they saw. No one questioned it. As we stepped back into the corridor, Holmes paused. "Something else is wrong here." Lyle was meticulous. He accounted for everything. Yet one detail jars. He turned on his heel and marched toward the storerooms. "What detail?" I asked, following. "There were no boot marks in the tunnel," Holmes said. "No scuffing, no drag lines. The earth was dry but soft. It should have recorded movement. And yet it was undisturbed." We reached the storerooms, where prison supplies were inventoried. Holmes went straight to the corner shelves, scanning crates of boots. After a moment, he pulled down a wooden box marked laundry disposals. Inside were pairs of threadbare shoes, prison issue slippers. Many discarded, some nearly new. He selected one pair, sniffed, then ran a finger along the soles. "Powdered chalk," he murmured. "Chalk. Used to dust the shoes to prevent tracking soot from the boiler room. Smart. And here's the real twist. These aren't prison issue size 10. They're elevating shoes. The heel's hollow, adds 2 inches. Turner said he saw Lyle lying still. If he walked out wearing these, no one would recognize him. Someone delivered them. Or left them. Which means he had help. That afternoon, back at Baker Street, Holmes paced ceaselessly while I tried to piece the logic behind these emerging fragments. He stopped only when Mrs. Hudson brought in a letter unmarked, unsigned. Holmes tore it open and scanned it quickly. His expression darkened. "It's begun," he muttered. "What has?" He passed the note to me. "A game, Mr. Holmes. The jack plays twice before the queen falls. Your move." I stared. Lyle. No doubt. He has a plan, Watson. Escaping was only Act 1. Holmes leaned against the mantel, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "He means to toy with us," he said quietly. "And he's warning me. 2 steps, then a larger piece falls. The queen." "You think it's a threat?" "I think it's worse," Holmes said grimly. "It's a puzzle." Later that evening, as Holmes stared out into the street with unseeing eyes, a new visitor arrived. Miss Caroline Dern, the magistrate's assistant who had prepared the prosecution's case against Lyle. A sharp, clear-eyed woman, she entered with hesitation. "I heard about the escape," she said. "I came because, well, I remembered something strange from the trial." Holmes gestured her to sit. Before the sentencing, Lyle asked to send a personal letter. It was declined, of course, but I saw a note he'd drafted. Most of it was unreadable, covered in symbols. I thought it code. He crumpled it before the guards took it. But one phrase stood out. She paused. It said, "The jack is never alone." Holmes's eyes lit with sudden fire. "Miss Dern, you've just changed the board." He moved swiftly to his desk, retrieving the playing card. Turning it over, he examined its back with a magnifying lens. "There," he whispered. "Tiny initials, CL, and faint ink, only visible under magnification." He held the card closer to the lamp. "Coordinates," he murmured. "Coordinates. A location in Hampstead Heath." The first step, we go tonight. The wind clawed at us as we crossed Hampstead Heath under a heavy moon. The coordinates had led us to a cluster of trees near the edge of an overgrown path. A place forgotten by the city's lamps and seldom visited even by wanderers. Holmes moved ahead of me with silent purpose, lantern low, scanning the earth. He paused beside a stone outcropping shaped like a weathered chair, then crouched. "A mark," he whispered. "Fresh." I joined him and saw it, a shallow impression in the earth, shaped like a heel. Beside it, something glinted faintly in the lantern's light. Holmes plucked it out with tweezers, a cufflink, gold and monogrammed. The initials AG. "Not Lyle's?" I said. "No," Holmes replied. "Someone else was here, likely met him. Or followed him." We returned to Baker Street with the cufflink secured. By morning, Holmes had traced the initials to one Arthur Graves, a former solicitor struck from the rolls for bribery, now operating as a consultant in certain dubious circles. We found him mid-afternoon in a flat off Euston Road, nervously puffing on a cigar far too fine for his station. Holmes introduced us calmly, sitting uninvited. "Mr. Greaves," he began, "what business brings you to Hampstead Heath at midnight?" The man froze, face draining. I don't know what you mean." "You dropped this," Holmes said, placing the cufflink on the table. Graves's mouth opened, closed, then twisted into a smile far too thin. "A walk, just a walk. Nothing illegal about that." "No," Holmes said. "But most do not walk into hidden clearings marked on ciphered playing cards. Cards sent by escaped prisoners." Greaves's facade cracked. "But only slightly. You have no proof." "Don't need it," Holmes replied. "I want your version." Graves hesitated. "All right," he said finally. "Yes, I met him. I didn't help him escape. I swear that. He came to me a month ago, asked me to hold something in trust. Payment, he said, for a future favor. After the escape, he contacted me, said to bring it to the Heath. What was it? A notebook. Sealed shut. I didn't open it. Who else knew? Holmes pressed. No one. Graves replied quickly. I swear. Holmes leaned in, gaze narrowing. You're lying. Not about the notebook, but about being alone. Graves flinched. There was a woman there? He mumbled. Tall, red coat. I didn't see her face. Lyle handed her the book. Then he vanished into the trees. Holmes stood, brushing lint from his sleeve. You'll remain available, he said, voice sharp. Do not attempt to vanish like your friend. Back on Baker Street, Holmes was silent for a long while, staring at the fireplace. Then, his drawing players onto the board, Watson. That woman, she's part of his second step. What was in the notebook? Something damning, no doubt. He's not blackmailing individuals, he's assembling a network. Everyone has a part to play. Late that evening, another lead surfaced. A warden from Coldstone, a man named Hinks, had contacted Lestrade, offering information. He claimed Lyle had confided in him before sentencing, cryptic things not worth reporting at the time. We met Hinks at a pub near the prison. He was stout, unshaven, eyes darting nervously. He said I'd regret not listening. Hinks muttered. Kept going on about a queen, a jack, and 2 kings falling in a day. Raving nonsense, I thought. Did he offer money? Holmes asked. Hinks hesitated. Yes. Said I could help him leave without walking out. I refused. I'm not dirty. But he escaped anyway. Hinks took a long drink. Yeah. And I heard something strange the night he vanished. Holmes leaned in. Go on. I was by the West Wing stairwell. Just before midnight, heard humming. Not a prisoner. No female staff in that block. Holmes's expression sharpened. You're certain? Clear as a bell, some old lullaby. Then footsteps, quick light, then silence. Back at the flat, Holmes paced furiously. A woman inside the prison. Red coat. Same voice heard that night. It's no coincidence. An accomplice? I asked. Possibly. Or something deeper. Lyle isn't just fleeing. He's orchestrating. That lullaby was his signal. Signal for what? For the next move. The following morning, we arranged interviews with several prison staff. Most were terse, mechanical in their answers. But one, Warden Ames, stood out. Middle-aged, heavy, set, and unusually eager. I always said there was something strange about Lyle. He began without prompting. Quiet type, always writing. Whispered to himself sometimes. Bit mad, if you ask me. Holmes nodded slowly. Did he ever speak of visitors? No. Never had any. No letters either. Total recluse. And the woman's voice that night? I asked. Ames blinked. What woman? Hinks reported hearing a lullaby near the stairwell. Ames frowned. Well, I never heard anything. Sounds like nerves to me. Hinks has always been a bit jumpy. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Curious. You were stationed 2 doors down. I was, rotating then, Ames said quickly. Might have missed it. As we left, Holmes spoke quietly. Too fast. Too rehearsed. You think Ames knows something. He's hiding something. Possibly fear. Possibly guilt. Back at Baker Street, Holmes summoned Lestrade again. Ames lied, he said flatly. I need his financial records, contacts, everything. He's connected to Lyle, or the woman. Lestrade sighed. This is turning into a web. Holmes picked up the playing card again, turning it over. The jack always plays with mirrors, Lestrade. It's our job to find what's behind the glass. The storm that rolled over London that night was not confined to the sky. Within the dim walls of Baker Street, Holmes sifted through a tempest of names, dates, and hidden motives, each thread as slippery as the last. He had transformed our sitting room into a chaos of pinned maps and scribbled notes, lines of red string tracing obscure patterns across the walls. There's more than escape at work here, he muttered, eyes scanning the map. This is a dismantling. Piece by piece. Of what? I asked. Holmes didn't answer directly. Instead, he pointed to the name Warden Ames at the center of his web. His records show 3 unaccounted for deposits in the last year. Large sums. Anonymous transfers routed through a firm in Belgium. Now consider the woman in red, the stolen notebook, and the lullaby heard during the escape. Each element tailored, I said slowly, to pull in someone specific. Exactly, Holmes replied. Each step of the escape involved someone vulnerable. Someone with something to hide, or something to gain. Lestrade arrived an hour later with a fresh stack of reports, already damp from the rain. You were right about Ames, he said, tossing the folder onto the table. The Belgian firm is a shell. Same one used by Greaves to launder payments when he was disbarred. And here's the kicker. Caroline Dern, the magistrate's assistant. Her younger sister is missing. Vanished 2 years ago without a trace. Holmes's eyes lit up, and he turned toward the fireplace. She's the red coat? You're certain? I asked. Too many coincidences, Watson. Dern mentioned Lyle's coded message as if it were an afterthought, but it was meant for her. A signal. Lyle knew her sister, possibly helped her vanish. And now he's using that leverage. Lestrade frowned. But why involve so many people? What's his endgame? Destruction, Holmes said flatly. But not indiscriminate. He's unraveling a verdict, a trial, perhaps a legacy. We must revisit the original case. By midday, we were seated with Miss Dern again, this time in a small cafe near the courts. Her eyes were wary now, guarded. Holmes began softly. Miss Dern. Why didn't you tell me your sister, Eliza, had vanished?" She stiffened. "That has nothing to do with." "It has everything to do with it. Lyle escaped under impossible circumstances, then passed a notebook to a woman matching your sister's description. I believe he's offering you something, her return, or an answer." Her hands trembled slightly, and she looked away. "He promised me the truth." Holmes leaned in. "In exchange for?" She was silent for a long time. "He said my sister was taken by people who worked for the court. That the trial which convicted him was part of something larger. A cover-up." I didn't believe him at first. But then the notes started arriving. Photographs. Places Eliza had been. "And you helped him," I said. "No," she said quickly. "I only passed messages. I didn't think he'd really escape. I thought, if he's lying, I lose nothing. If he's telling the truth, I get her back." Holmes studied her, not with judgment, but with sharp calculation. "You were used," he said. "Lyle plays long games. If he revealed something about Eliza, it's because she's another piece on the board, not because he intends kindness." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I just want to know where she is." We left her with a warning to remain available. As we stepped back into the rainy street, Holmes's thoughts were already racing ahead. He told the truth about Eliza, but not the full truth. She may be free, or she may be dead. Either way, he used her as leverage to control Miss Dern. "You think Eliza was involved in the original crime?" "I think she saw something, or discovered something, enough to make her dangerous. Which makes her disappearance the first move in this entire affair." We returned to the records of Lyle's original trial. He had been convicted for orchestrating a securities fraud that ruined several wealthy investors, one of whom later committed suicide. But buried in the transcripts was a strange omission. One name: Merrick and Boulton, a minor firm that disappeared days after Lyle's arrest. Was never mentioned during the proceedings. "I remember that name," Holmes murmured. "They handled offshore holdings for several high-level clients." "And Eliza Dern once worked there," I added, pointing to a staff directory. Holmes nodded slowly. "There's the thread. She found something, told Lyle. That made them both targets." By evening, Holmes had obtained a list of Merrick and Boulton's former clients. 3 names stood out: Arthur Graves, Warden Ames, and a now deceased magistrate named Hawthorne. All had sat on the periphery of Lyle's trial. All had reason to silence anyone who knew too much. "Then the motive is protection," I said. "They framed Lyle to protect themselves." "Partially," Holmes replied. "But Lyle was no innocent. He knew what they did, likely profited from it himself. Then he turned, threatened to expose them, so they turned first. And now he's returning the favor." Lestrade sent word that evening Graves had vanished. His flat emptied, bank accounts closed, no sign of struggle. He had simply slipped away. "Another piece removed," Holmes said grimly. "Lyle doesn't need them anymore." "Then what's next?" Holmes stared into the streetlight-streaked window. "The Queen," he whispered. "He said she falls after the Jack plays twice." "You think Dern is the Queen?" Holmes shook his head. "No. Not anymore. The Queen is the final target, the central figure, and I believe we're about to see her face." 2 mornings later, the fog lifted just enough to let the illusion of resolution take hold. Lestrade burst into Baker Street in a rare mood. Chest puffed. Umbrella forgotten in the stairwell, face flushed with triumph. "We've got him," he declared, holding up a telegram. "Lyle, caught trying to board a steamer at Tilbury under a false name. Dock authorities flagged him from a sketch we circulated. He's in custody as we speak." Holmes didn't move from the hearth. His gaze remained fixed on the coals, unmoved. "Too convenient," he murmured. Lestrade blinked. "Beg pardon." Holmes rose, slow and deliberate, like a man climbing out of deep water. "Lyle isn't a man who runs. He moves. Escaping from Coldstone was a message, not a flight. This, Tilbury, the steamer, the false papers, this is theatre." Lestrade's pride deflated a notch. "He matches the description. The guards confirmed it. And we found the red coat hidden in his luggage. Torn, but recognizable." Watson and I exchanged a glance. Holmes took the telegram and studied it wordlessly. Then, suddenly, he turned to his desk and retrieved the sealed envelope he'd taken from Graves's flat. The one marked only with the symbol of a crown and a jack. "I was waiting," he said, slicing it open. Inside was a single playing card, the Queen of Hearts. On the back, written in the same coded hand we'd encountered before, a short message. "The Queen falls at midnight. Let them cheer. Let them sleep." Holmes set the card down carefully. "We are being handed the wrong ending," he said. "And while they celebrate, the real plan continues." By midday, the newspapers were ablaze with headlines: "Lyle recaptured in daring night chase. A prison break concluded with arrest at Tilbury, and justice restored after Coldstone scandal." The city exiled its tension. Even Miss Dern sent a note. Perhaps now the nightmare ends. But Holmes read it in silence and tucked it away, face unreadable. We went to Tilbury that evening to see the man ourselves. The prisoner was held in a small cell in the customs station, manacled and guarded by 3 constables. At first glance he was Lyle, same wary frame, dark hair, piercing stare. But Holmes stepped in and examined the man without a word, his gaze sweeping from the man's left ear to his fingernails. He leaned in, barely a whisper. "Tell me, how did you escape Coldstone exactly?" The man smirked. "Tunnel under the chapel floor. It had been there since the old days. I bribed Ames to keep watch." Holmes stood. "Interesting, because the chapel was closed for reconstruction the entire week prior, and Ames was transferred to the East Wing 2 months before the escape." The prisoner's smile faltered. "You're bluffing." "No," Holmes said coldly. "You are, and poorly." A flash of panic crossed the man's face. Holmes turned to Lestrade. "This isn't Lyle. It's an impersonator, likely paid handsomely to be caught." The man shouted, struggled, cursed. But the performance had slipped. His accent cracked under pressure, the timbre different from Lyle's clipped Oxford tones we'd heard in recordings. Holmes stepped out, jaw clenched. "The real Lyle is still moving, and this charade was meant to blind us." Lestrade paled. "But the coat, the card, planted, meant to lead us precisely here, precisely now. He wanted us to believe the game was over." "But what about the message? The Queen falls at midnight. Is it still real?" "Oh, very much so," Holmes said. "And we have 6 hours left." Back at Baker Street, Holmes's energy was electric, his mind fully re-engaged, snapping from connection to connection. Lyle wouldn't hand us a victory unless it served him. We must ask what happens when we stop looking. "The Queen," I said. "You said she's the final target." Holmes nodded. "Yes, and she is someone untouchable. Someone whom exposing would undo the entire verdict against Lyle. Who would be the final piece? The person with everything to lose." He sat suddenly, fingers steepled, eyes closed. "Merrick and Boulton," he said. "Their files were seized after the scandal, quietly, by the ministry, but one name remained buried in the offshore documents, a name connected to all others: Ames, Graves, even the late magistrate Hawthorne. Who?" He opened his eyes. "Justice Augusta Langley." I drew in breath. She oversaw the appeal that rejected Lyle's clemency petition. She also wrote the summary that excised Merrick and Boulton from the records. At the time, she was considered unshakable, impeccable. But Lyle knew. He had the proof, perhaps in the notebook Greaves carried. The Queen of Hearts. Lestrade returned an hour later, grim-faced. "You were right," the man confessed. Said he was paid £1,000 to play the part. Name's Henry Bluth. 2 priors for fraud. He thought it was a lark. Holmes barely acknowledged him. Justice Langley, where is she now? At the Royal Society's annual gala, Lestrade said. Tonight. She's receiving a Lifetime Service Award. Holmes stood at once. That's where it ends. Not with Lyle escaping, not with bodies, but with revelation. He's going to expose her publicly, and the Queen falls, I said. Holmes nodded. At midnight, the Royal Society's gala glistened beneath crystal chandeliers and polished oak, every corner echoing with the refined murmur of London's elite. Yet Holmes moved through it not as a guest, but as a shadow, eyes scanning every corridor, every movement, every face. Searching not for Lyle, but for the mechanism he had set in motion. Justice Langley was due to speak at precisely midnight, the moment the Queen would fall. But Holmes, ever the skeptic of symbols, believed the real collapse had already begun. Quietly, invisibly. We stood beneath a colonnade that overlooked the main ballroom. Langley was seated at a high table beside the Minister of Justice, serene as ever, unaware of the knife poised in the air above her reputation. Holmes's gaze lingered not on her, but on the man delivering wine to her table. A server with a familiar gait, too graceful, too self-assured for someone paid to be unnoticed. Holmes's hand shot out, gripping my sleeve. "There," he whispered. "He's not staff. Look at the shoes. Italian leather, custom cut. That man is no footman. It wasn't Lyle, but it was someone trained, possibly ex-military. A courier or agent." Holmes moved, silent as smoke, weaving through the crowd. He intercepted the man near a side corridor, stepping into his path with a glass lifted in mock cheer. "Lovely night for a reckoning," Holmes said. The man froze, instantly alert. But before he could react, Lestrade stepped in behind him with a pair of constables. Holmes plucked a leather folder from under the man's coat as he was restrained. "Would you be kind enough to alert Justice Langley?" Holmes asked one of the guards. "Tell her Sherlock Holmes insists on a private word. She may decline." "Of course, but she won't." Langley arrived minutes later in a private study, flanked by 2 attendants. Her expression was calm, curious, but not yet worried. "Mr. Holmes," she said smoothly, "if this is about your prison escape artist, I suggest you speak with Scotland Yard. I'm celebrating tonight. You may want to postpone," Holmes said, unsealing the folder. "What I hold here is not just damning, it is ancient. The roots of your current predicament lie far beyond Lyle's trial. They stretch back to a case you buried 17 years ago." Her composure cracked, slightly, just enough. "I don't know what you're implying." Holmes placed a thin dossier on the table. In 1875, a woman named Clara Everleigh filed a complaint against the firm of Merrick and Boulton. Fraud and misappropriation of funds. Her evidence implicated a young solicitor, Arthur Graves, then fresh out of university, who was working under a senior barrister named Edwin Langley. Langley's silence deepened. Holmes continued. "The case was never prosecuted, the file vanished. But the woman did not. Clara Everleigh is Eliza Dern's mother. A connection Lyle exploited later. The firm changed names. Edwin Langley rose in the judiciary, and you, his daughter, took his place." She looked down, the fury behind her eyes carefully masked. "You're making a very dangerous suggestion." "No," Holmes replied. Lyle is. I'm merely assembling the stage before the curtain rises. He found the original complaint buried in Merrick and Bolton's offshore archive. With it, he proved a generational cover-up. Graves, Ames, Hawthorne, and your own family all profited from that silence. And what would he gain by exposing me now? She snapped. What does he want? Vindication, Holmes said. Not of innocence, but of cleverness. He wants the world to see how easily truth bends under power, and how easily power can be unseated by truth. Langley stepped back, the weight of her father's sins pressing visibly into her spine. You have no proof that I knew of the original complaint. No, Holmes admitted, but Lyle does. Or rather, he believes he does. And at midnight, unless I stop him, that proof will be broadcast to every journalist and court clerk in London, along with records of your sealed correspondence with Greaves over the last 6 years. I suspect you tried to bury a few more secrets after your appointment to the bench. She was pale now, and she knew. What do you want from me? Not me. Him. Holmes pointed to the dossier. Lyle is playing the final card, the Queen. But he's not trying to kill you. He wants your voice, your public disgrace. If you step down quietly within the hour and announce a review of all convictions from that trial period, I believe he'll withhold the worst. And if I don't, then he releases everything, and none of us can stop it. She sat heavily, the steel of her office gone. Holmes turned and motioned to Lestrade. Station someone outside her home. If she tries to flee, stop her. But if she does what's asked, let it end there. We returned to Baker Street just after 1 in the morning. The city was still humming with headlines about the false capture, still wrapped in a blanket of illusion. But somewhere, in an office none of us could see, Augusta Langley was writing her resignation. Holmes poured 2 brandies and handed me one. You knew about the Everleigh case all along, I asked. No, he said. But I knew Lyle wanted to disgrace, not escape. His clues pointed to a trial, not a murder. Once I realized Eliza was Clara Everleigh's daughter, the rest fell into place. Do you think Langley will resign? She must. Or she's a fool. And Lyle, he's still out there, watching, waiting, but for now he believes he's won. Holmes raised his glass. To justice, I asked. To the past, he replied. It never really leaves. It only waits until someone clever enough digs it back up. Dawn crept reluctantly into Baker Street, casting grey light across the flat as Holmes stood motionless by the window, eyes fixed on the street below. The city stirred like a creature pretending to sleep. Too quiet, too tense. We had outmaneuvered one threat, but Holmes knew Lyle was not finished. Not by a long measure. He finally turned to me, his expression sharper than usual. There is still one piece missing, he said. Lyle did not go to such elaborate lengths for mere exposure. Justice Langley was not the endgame, only a detour. The true target, the core, remains obscured. He moved to the cluttered desk and retrieved Graves's old spectacles, the ones recovered from his flat after his death. Holmes had kept them, though they seemed irrelevant at the time. Now, he turned them over in his hand thoughtfully. They're scratched, I noted, watching him. Exactly. And Graves, despite his degenerating vision, kept these rather than replace them. Why? He fetched a small case from the cabinet, placed the spectacles under a polarized lens, and adjusted the light until the scratch on the left lens shimmered faintly. There, Holmes murmured, a code etched by hand, nearly invisible to the naked eye. A habit of espionage circles, especially when passing messages through objects unlikely to be examined. What does it say? Holmes peered closely, transcribing quickly. Check the taxidermy. The fox has secrets." He looked at me gravely. We returned to Graves's flat. Now, the room on Albemarle Street had been sealed by the yard, but Lestrade, still smarting from the earlier misstep, grudgingly allowed Holmes access. Inside, nothing had changed. The dead air, the overturned shelf, the broken lamp in the corner. Holmes crossed immediately to the mounted fox above the fireplace. An odd fixture Graves had always claimed was a family heirloom. Holmes climbed the small step stool, pulled a slender blade from his coat, and slid it between the seams of the mount. A dull click followed. The fox's head came loose, revealing a hollow interior, and inside, a folded parchment yellowed with age, sealed with red wax. Holmes opened it with care. There were only a few lines, handwritten in the same hand that had scrawled messages across the false prisoner's luggage and the playing card. "If they find this, I have failed, but truth endures. The ledger is not destroyed, only hidden. It names all who sold the law and profited from the sale. The original is not in London. They'll never look in Altona." Holmes read it twice. "He's left the real evidence abroad. Greaves must have kept this as an emergency trigger, something to retrieve if they were both exposed." "Where is Altona?" I asked. "A district in Hamburg," Holmes said. "Germany, and one outside British jurisdiction. Clever, especially if he anticipates a diplomatic delay in retrieving it." Lestrade, who had followed us, leaned in. "Then we have to notify the Foreign Office." Holmes shook his head. "No, too slow, and too many years. If the ledger reaches the wrong hands, it vanishes for good." We returned to Baker Street with the parchment, but Holmes was already in motion. Not packing, not writing, thinking. His violin sat untouched, his pipe cold. Then he did something unexpected. He sent a telegram, not to the Yard, nor to any official. It was addressed to Eliza Dern. "What are you doing?" I asked. "She is the one Lyle used," he said. Which means he trusted her. But now, with Langley unseated, she will feel adrift, abandoned. Guilt will be stirring. She's the key to drawing Lyle out. "You intend to lure him." "I intend to provoke him," Holmes said quietly, "with something he cannot ignore." That evening, Eliza arrived alone. She stood in our sitting room, stiff-backed. Her expression caught between pride and shame. Holmes offered no greeting, only gestured toward the fireplace, where the fox's mount now lay. "Its secret exposed. You loved your mother," Holmes began. "But Lyle turned that pain into a weapon. You gave him access to files, contacts, names." "Yes." She hesitated, then nodded once. "He said it was justice." "And now that justice has become vengeance," Holmes said. "What do you think he'll do with the ledger he's hidden in Germany?" Eliza swallowed hard. He said it would end everything. That no one would recover from it." Holmes leaned forward. "There's a way to stop him. But I must know something you've never told anyone, not even him." "I must know what he fears." She blinked. "Fears?" "Yes. Not what angers him. What shakes him. Something that pierces the armor." She looked away, hands trembling. "He once told me a story," she said finally. "About when he was a boy. His father was arrested for a fraud charge. They were innocent, both of them, but the arrest was so public, so humiliating, that it destroyed them." Lyle said he could still hear the constable reading out the charges in front of a crowd. Said he'd never forget the sound. Holmes nodded slowly. "Then we make that sound again." The following morning, a public notice appeared in the London Gazette, posted not by the Yard, but via a civilian petition. It named Jacob Lyle and announced the issuance of an open warrant for conspiracy, extortion, and fraud. It included the unusual detail that the primary evidence, a black ledger, had been located and was en route to Scotland Yard via special courier from Germany. "That's a bluff," I said as Holmes handed me the paper. "Precisely," he replied. "Because Lyle can't ignore it. If the ledger truly exists, he must intercept it. And when he reaches for it, we catch him, not with force, but with fear. The fear of the past repeating itself. But what if he suspects the bluff? Then we must play one more card." Holmes stood and retrieved the Queen of Hearts from the mantel. The one Lyle had sent as a warning. He scribbled something on the back and handed it to Lestrade. "Post this in every paper by morning. Let Lyle see his own tricks played back to him." The message was short. "Kings fall harder than queens. The past is riding in. Be at the fountain." And below it, a time midnight. St. Bartholomew's courtyard. Holmes turned to me with a glint in his eye I had not seen in weeks. "We're not hunting Lyle anymore," he said. "We're baiting him. And this time the trap is made of memory." The night air hung heavy over St. Bartholomew's courtyard, thick with mist and tension. Midnight was near. Holmes stood by the old stone fountain, hands in his coat pockets, hat pulled low. I kept close to the shadows, watching each window, every footstep. Lestrade had placed men discreetly in alleys and behind the church gate. No one would approach without being seen. At least that was the hope. The fountain gurgled softly. Time stretched. Then a flicker of motion, a figure stepped into view. Lyle. He moved like a man expecting betrayal at every turn. Still elegant in his stride, but taut beneath the surface. Holmes didn't move. "I assume the ledger's a lie," Lyle said quietly. Holmes gave a faint shrug. "Not entirely. There's a parchment, a destination. Enough for someone with your habits to panic. You're playing with fire." "No, Lyle," Holmes said, voice calm. "You lit the match." Lyle glanced around, and though his tone stayed level, I saw it. He wasn't sure. The bluff had worked. For the first time, Holmes had shaken his balance. Then, too fast to follow, Lyle reached into his coat and hurled a small object into the fountain. There was a muffled crack as the surface of the water rippled. Holmes lunged forward, but it was too late. The object had shattered on impact. A thick, dark liquid spread beneath the water, ink or perhaps something more corrosive. "The original letter," Holmes muttered, peering in. "He had it. He brought it here just to destroy it." Lyle gave a smile. "Now we're even." Lestrade and his men surged forward, but Lyle didn't run. He raised his hands with almost theatrical resignation as they seized him. He had played his final card and burned the evidence behind him. But as he was dragged away, Holmes didn't look satisfied. He turned back to the fountain, staring at the ink cloud still swirling. He whispered, "No, that's not all he destroyed." By morning, the news of Lyle's arrest was spreading fast. The papers ran headlines of a criminal mastermind unmasked, of justice done, of Holmes's brilliance. Yet back at Baker Street, Holmes paced the floor like a man with a thorn in his brain. "It wasn't just the parchment," he said for the third time. "He had something else. Something irreplaceable." I tried to reason with him. "He's in custody. We can go to Hamburg, recover the ledger. The case is nearly finished." "No," Holmes said, stopping abruptly. That wasn't a panic move. That was a message. He knew he'd be caught. He planned to lose. A knock interrupted us. Lestrade, his face pale. "We've had a break-in," he said. "Graves' flat again." Someone bypassed the police seal. We followed him through grey streets to the flat on Albemarle. Inside, chaos. Papers shredded, drawers overturned. Even the mounted fox had been split wider, the interior gutted. "The ledger's decoy letter is gone," Lestrade said grimly. "We kept it under lock." "But they found it." No, Holmes said softly. It wasn't Lyle. He moved to the writing desk, which had seemed untouched at first glance. But now, Holmes pointed to a smudge, red wax. The drawer had been opened, resealed. He pulled it open, revealing the faint outline of something that had once been pressed there, a second hidden envelope. Gone now. Someone else wanted it. Someone who knew what Greaves left behind. We stood silent a moment. Then Holmes turned to Lestrade. Who was guarding the flat? Constable Rowan and Inspector Carruthers. Holmes's expression didn't change, but I saw something shift behind his eyes. I'd like to speak with Inspector Carruthers, he said. Lestrade hesitated. That may be difficult. He hasn't reported in since last night. Holmes turned away, jaw tight. Of course he hasn't. He paced once, then said, Carruthers has a brother in Munich. Former military, now a banker. The perfect courier. If Carruthers intercepted the letter and made for the continent, the original ledger may already be gone. But why? I asked. Why destroy or steal it now? Because, Holmes said grimly, Carruthers isn't working alone. Lyle's web stretches further than we thought. Lestrade looked stunned. You think there's a mole in the yard? More than one? Holmes said. The break-in proves it. Only someone with official access could bypass the lock, remove just the letter, and vanish. I asked the only question left. So what do we do? Holmes walked to the window. Outside, the morning fog was beginning to lift, revealing a city eager for closure. But the truth was slipping through our fingers. We force the mole's hand, he said. We don't chase the evidence. We make them need it again. The ledger was destroyed, or they believe it was. But if they think another copy exists, he turned to me. We forge a second decoy. Not a blank one, but one with just enough truth to make it irresistible. Dates, initials, fragments of real meetings. You'll be painting a target on yourself. Then let them aim, he said. But this time, I'll be waiting. By evening, the plan was in motion. A whisper of a backup ledger, found in a second mount at Greaves's country home, began to circulate. Holmes saw to it that the rumor reached the right ears. Through a forged leak, an intercepted telegram, and a curious file marked, to be sealed by special order. And as the sun sank below the city, Holmes waited again. By the fire, violin silent in its case. Eyes narrowed. The real criminal had not vanished. They had simply stepped behind another mask. But even in the shadows, they could not resist chasing the last piece of a game they thought they'd won. Because Holmes was no longer just hunting a criminal. He was hunting the truth, and he knew now. It wasn't only hidden. It was being protected. The chill in the air seemed to deepen overnight, as if the city itself was holding its breath. I found Holmes in the study early the next morning, his gaze fixed on the flickering embers of the hearth. His mind clearly far away. The tension was palpable, an almost tangible weight pressing on the room. We had barely begun to set our trap, and yet, the game was already changing. Before Holmes could speak, a sharp, frantic knock at the door shattered the silence. Lestrade burst in, his face pale and voice tight with urgency. Holmes, there's been another incident. At the very heart of this case. Holmes stood instantly alert. Speak. The body of Inspector Carruthers was found this morning in an alley behind the yard. It appears he was attacked. No witnesses so far. The timing, it's too precise to be coincidence. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Carruthers had vanished days ago, and now he was dead. The web was tightening, and the predator was no longer content to lurk in shadows. They were striking out. Holmes wasted no time. Show me. The walk to the yard was grim and silent. Arriving at the scene, We found it cordoned off, police milling about with grim faces. The alley was narrow and cloaked in mist, littered with the detritus of the city. The body was carefully covered with a coarse cloth. But the telltale signs were clear enough. Bruises, a fractured skull, and a faint trace of a crimson smear on the cobblestone. Holmes crouched by the body, eyes narrowing. "Notice the position," he murmured. He wasn't just attacked, he was left where he could be found. Staged almost deliberately. Lestrade nodded grimly. "A message, then." "A message and a warning," Holmes said quietly. "Our friend wishes to demonstrate reach and ruthlessness." I glanced around, my mind racing. But if Carruthers was part of the mole network, could this be internal? A betrayal among traitors? Holmes shook his head. "No. This is personal." Carruthers knew something that endangered the entire operation. His death is meant to silence him and intimidate others. The implications were staggering. The ledger, the forged decoy, the thefts, all threads tangled in a deadly game. Now the stakes were life itself. Returning to Baker Street, Holmes was restless, pacing and humming beneath his breath. Then suddenly, he stopped, eyes blazing. "We must reassess every step. The attack on Carruthers means our adversary has grown bold. They're watching, learning. Our decoy must be more than a trap. It must bait the real villain into a reveal." I asked cautiously, "But how? We don't even know who the villain truly is." Holmes smiled, thin and sharp. "That is precisely why we must change tactics. We need to draw out the hidden hand with a show of vulnerability." That evening, Holmes and I returned to the country estate where the forged ledger was supposedly kept, a place now crawling with police. Yet Holmes's plan was unorthodox. Instead of a heavy guard, he insisted on minimal presence, allowing the rumor of weakness to spread. Days passed with no incident. Then, late one night, a faint noise stirred the air, the sound of movement near the library window. Holmes and I were ready. Silently, we watched as a shadow slipped through the garden and approached the house. The intruder moved with caution but confidence. As they reached the window, Holmes stepped forward, a quiet voice cutting through the night. "You have taken too many risks." The figure froze, then slowly turned. Under the faint moonlight, we saw a face we had overlooked: Constable Rowan. His eyes flickered with desperation, but also calculation. "You think you've trapped me? You're mistaken." Holmes advanced, calm but commanding. "Why betray your oath? What have you gained by endangering so many?" Rowan's expression twisted. "You know nothing of what's at stake. This isn't just about greed or revenge. It's about survival, ours and theirs. You're meddling in matters far beyond your understanding." Before we could react, Rowan lunged for the window latch. Holmes was quicker, grabbing his arm. A struggle ensued, but Rowan managed to break free and vanish into the night. The chase was swift but futile. He disappeared into the labyrinth of London's streets, leaving behind a chilling message. The enemy was closer than we thought, and willing to kill again. Back at Baker Street, Holmes was resolute. "This confirms it. Our mole network is deeper than Lyle or Carruthers. Rowan was the link, but not the mastermind." I asked, "Then what now?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with determination. "We're prepared for the final move. The game is no longer just about uncovering secrets. It is about surviving long enough to reveal them." The case had taken a deadly turn, and the shadows around us thickened. But Holmes, ever the master of the unseen, was ready. The real criminal remained several steps ahead, but now, the hunt was on a new level, where every moment counted, and every misstep could be fatal. The morning light filtered weakly through the thick curtains of 221B Baker Street, casting a muted glow over the scattered papers and half-empty teacups that littered Holmes's cluttered desk. The tension from the previous night's chase still lingered in the room, but Holmes's restless energy was unmistakable. He stood by the window, eyes fixed on the distant skyline of London, as if the city itself held the secret he sought. I poured myself a cup of tea, glancing over the notes we had compiled, witness statements, timelines, and the peculiar details of each suspect's behavior. The case had spiraled into a web of betrayals and deception, but something in Holmes's demeanor suggested that the chaos was beginning to yield to order. Holmes turned abruptly, beckoning me closer. "Watson, I believe we have overlooked a most subtle yet vital thread, a detail so easily dismissed that it escaped even my notice until now." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Do tell." He approached the desk, picking up a seemingly innocuous object. A worn leather glove, found near the scene of Carruthers's murder. This glove, found at the alleyway, has been catalogued as merely incidental. Yet, it bears a faint scent of cedarwood and a peculiar residue I recognized only this morning. Holmes opened a small cabinet and retrieved a vial of fragrant oil. This oil is used exclusively by a rare watchmaker in Mayfair, a man known for his discreet clientele and peculiar habits. The connection was unexpected, but Holmes's mind was already racing. Consider the patterns, the presence of the glove here, the watchmaker's penchant for secrecy, and Rowan's sudden flight. The mole's network must extend into places we had not yet suspected. I nodded slowly, piecing the fragments together. So the watchmaker is more than a craftsman, he's a player in this deadly game. Holmes's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Precisely. And the subtle habits of our suspects, the way the ledger was forged with meticulous precision, the careful staging of the crime scenes, all point to a mastermind who is both patient and cunning. We spent the day retracing our steps, revisiting old testimonies and examining overlooked minutiae. Each conversation, each object, took on new significance under Holmes's keen scrutiny. The seemingly random acts, the hurried exit of a servant, the cryptic comment from Mrs. Faraday about a stranger at dusk, the misplaced set of keys in the study, were all pieces of a larger puzzle. As evening fell, Holmes sat back, fingers steepled. The pattern emerges clearly now. The crimes, the cover-ups, even the recent attack on Carruthers, they are all threads woven into a tapestry designed to mislead and divide. But what is the purpose of this elaborate deception? I asked. Holmes smiled faintly, the shadows deepening in his sharp features. To protect a secret far more valuable than mere money or revenge. Something hidden in plain sight, shielded by the chaos of these smaller crimes. He rose abruptly, eyes alight with renewed purpose. Tomorrow, we visit the watchmaker. It is time to confront the architect of this maze. I followed Holmes into the cool night, the city's pulse quickening around us. The pattern was no longer a mystery. It was a roadmap, a path leading straight to the heart of the darkness that had ensnared us all. The hunt was about to reach its critical turning point. The following morning found Holmes and me navigating the narrow, cobblestone streets of Mayfair, the spring chill still hanging in the air. Our destination was the workshop of the elusive watchmaker, a modest façade nestled between two larger shops, its windows curtained against the prying eyes of the world. Holmes's pace was steady but purposeful, the weight of discovery pressing upon him. We were admitted by a slender, pallid man whose eyes flickered with cautious calculation as we stepped inside. The workshop was a labyrinth of gears, springs, and polished wood, an artisan's sanctuary masked by the sterile precision of his craft. Holmes wasted no time. his gaze scanning the room with meticulous detail, seeking the unseen threads that might betray his host. After an exchange of polite formalities, Holmes's voice lowered, his tone taking on the subtle edge of inquiry that always unsettled those with secrets to hide. "Mr. Ellery, your work is renowned, yet few know the true extent of your clientele. Might I ask how a man of your talents finds himself entangled in affairs of such clandestine nature?" Ellery's composure faltered for a fraction, a flicker of unease swiftly masked by a veneer of civility. "Gentlemen, the world is filled with shadows, and sometimes one must navigate them to survive." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Indeed. But survival, Mr. Ellery, seldom demands the sacrifice of innocence or the destruction of lives. The matter at hand involves far more than mechanical precision. It touches upon betrayal, murder, and a web of deception stretching beyond this room." A tense silence settled. Ellery's hands trembled slightly as he reached beneath his workbench, producing a faded photograph, an image of a young woman with striking eyes, both haunting and familiar. "You speak of motives, detective," he said quietly. "Perhaps it is time you understood mine." He spoke then of a past buried beneath layers of pain and loss, a story of love and betrayal, of a sister lost to ruin and disgrace after a scandal that left their family shattered. The woman in the photograph was his sister, a victim of greed and slander orchestrated by those who now stood to gain from their downfall. Ellery's voice hardened. "The ledger you chase is not merely an account of debts and credits. It conceals the truth of that scandal, the corruption that destroyed my family. Those who forged it sought to erase history and silence those who dared speak. I endeavored to expose them, but they struck first." Holmes's gaze was unflinching. "And the murders, the attacks, necessary evils," Ellery replied, his eyes flashing with bitter resolve. "Each step was a move in a dangerous game. I never wished for innocent blood, but the web of lies was suffocating. To break free, sacrifices had to be made." As Ellery's confession unfolded, the pieces of the puzzle shifted. The crime was no longer about money or power alone. It was a reckoning, a quest for justice warped by desperation and vengeance. The villain was not simply a calculating criminal, but a man driven by the scars of his past, willing to traverse moral darkness to reclaim what was lost. Holmes considered this revelation carefully. "Your motive explains much, but does it justify the cost?" Ellery's expression hardened. "Justification is a luxury I cannot afford. Only survival, and the hope that, in the end, truth will prevail." The weight of his words hung heavy between us. The line between victim and villain blurred, revealing a complexity that defied easy judgment. The case was no longer a straightforward pursuit of justice, but a tangled exploration of human frailty and the lengths to which one will go when consumed by pain. As we left the workshop, the city seemed different, its shadows deeper, its secrets more intricate. Holmes's mind raced with new insights, but also new questions. The hidden motive had been revealed, but the path to resolution was still fraught with peril. The game was far from over. Night had fallen, draping London in a thick veil of fog that crept between gas lamps and muffled the city's usual clamor. In the dim glow of my lantern, Holmes and I stood outside a grand townhouse in a quiet square, its facade shadowed and foreboding. This was Ellery's residence, or at least the place where Holmes suspected he would make his final move. The air was taut with anticipation. Every detail of the evening had been orchestrated to perfection. Holmes's eyes glinted with calm certainty as he whispered, "The web tightens, Watson. Ellery believes himself untouchable, but we have given him no choice but to reveal himself. We had laid our trap carefully. Months of investigation, subtle manipulations, and planted information had led to this moment. Ellery's desperation would be his undoing. Holmes had fed him a fabricated lead, a hidden ledger supposedly found, exposing an accomplice. The bait was set. Now, all that remained was to wait for the hunter to become the hunted. Inside, muffled voices rose and fell, punctuated by footsteps. Holmes's finger pressed lightly to my arm. Patience. The door creaked open, and a tall figure stepped into the street, the sharp outline of a man clad in dark coat unmistakable even through the fog. Ellery's face was pale, his eyes scanning the empty square before settling on us with a flash of recognition. And something more primal, fear. "You've been following me, Holmes," he said, voice low but charged. "I wondered how long before you came knocking." Holmes stepped forward, voice steady. "Enough blood has been spilled, Ellery. The lies and betrayals end tonight. Surrender, and the court will hear your story fully." Ellery's gaze flicked to the shadowed corners of the square, then back. "You think you understand, don't you? The pain, the loss. But you've only glimpsed the surface. I did what had to be done." Suddenly, Ellery's hand moved swiftly beneath his coat. Holmes's reflexes were instantaneous. His arm shot out, catching the wrist and twisting it with a practiced grip. A small pistol clattered to the cobblestones. "Violence won't change your fate," Holmes said quietly, never losing his calm. Ellery sagged, the fight draining from him. "You leave me no choice." Holmes's sharp eyes searched Ellery's face, noting the flicker of defeat mixed with defiance. "Tell us everything. The truth in full." As we led Ellery toward the waiting constables, he began to unravel the final threads of his story. The deep wounds inflicted by betrayal, the manipulation that drove him to extremes, and the intricate plan to expose those who had ruined his family. His confession was raw, tinged with sorrow and a lingering bitterness. Yet, beneath the surface, Holmes's analysis was unerring. The intricate puzzle pieces fell into place: the forged ledger, the staged crime scenes, the calculated diversions, all to shield a truth that, once revealed, would topple powerful figures hiding behind respectable facades. The case was closed, but its echoes would linger. Justice, Holmes reminded me, was rarely neat or simple. It was a fragile balance of truth and consequence. As dawn broke, the city awakened to the news. Ellery's capture sent ripples through the undercurrents of London's society. But Holmes and I, standing quietly in the fading night, knew that beneath the surface of every solved case lay a deeper story, one only the keenest eyes could discern. The prisoner who had escaped without leaving was finally caught, not just in the law's grasp, but in the unyielding logic of Sherlock Holmes's mind. As the morning light spilled into our modest lodgings on Baker Street, I allowed myself a moment's respite. The weight of the past weeks, of cryptic clues, false leads and dark confessions, began to lift, replaced by the fragile relief that comes with a case ostensibly closed. Ellery had been taken into custody, his guilt seemingly laid bare by his own admissions. Yet, if there was one certainty I had learned alongside Holmes, it was that in his world, no conclusion was ever final. Holmes sat quietly by the window, pipe in hand, eyes fixed on the street below, his mind clearly elsewhere. I approached, curious if his thoughts still churned with the case. "Holmes," I ventured, "do you believe justice has been truly served?" He didn't reply immediately, his gaze distant. Finally, he spoke, voice low but firm. "Justice, Watson, is not a matter of appearances but of truth. And truth is a shifting creature." Just then, a knock disturbed the quiet. A messenger entered, bearing a small, sealed envelope marked with a crest we had seen before, the emblem of one of London's most influential families, a name never mentioned in our previous inquiries. Holmes's brow furrowed as he broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. "Watson," he said slowly, "it appears we have overlooked a crucial piece of this puzzle. This letter is a confession, not from Ellery, but from someone far higher up the chain." I leaned in to read. The confession detailed a web of manipulation orchestrated by a figure who had expertly concealed their hand, directing events from behind a veneer of respectability. The true mastermind was none other than Lady Agnes Pembroke, a woman of considerable social standing, whose motives were steeped not in personal gain, but in safeguarding her family's legacy at any cost. Holmes's eyes gleamed with renewed intensity. Ellery was but a pawn manipulated and sacrificed. Lady Agnes orchestrated the entire sequence, using fear, influence, and deception to hide her involvement. I felt a chill. The complexity of the scheme was staggering. The innocence we had attributed to Lady Agnes was a carefully maintained facade. But why reveal this now? I asked. Holmes tapped the letter thoughtfully. Because, Watson, guilt is a burden that can become unbearable, and even the most cunning will seek relief in the end. But our work is far from over. We must confront her and ensure the full truth is laid bare. Preparations were swift. We arrived at the Pembroke estate under the guise of a routine inquiry, but Holmes's presence carried the weight of inevitability. Lady Agnes received us with practiced composure, her eyes sharp beneath a mask of cordiality. Holmes spoke plainly, laying out the evidence with precision. The letter, the manipulation of witnesses, the subtle coercion, all pointed to her. For a moment her face remained unreadable. Then, a flicker of something almost like regret passed through her eyes. "You misunderstand me, Mr. Holmes," she said quietly. "I did what was necessary to protect those I love. Sometimes the truth is a luxury we cannot afford." Holmes's reply was calm but resolute. "The truth is the only justice that truly frees us, Lady Agnes." As the gravity of her confession settled, it became clear that the case's final chapter was not one of simple guilt or innocence, but of human frailty and the lengths to which one will go to shield their own. We left the estate with a sense of closure that was both satisfying and somber. The prisoner who escaped without leaving was not merely Ellery, but the shadow of deceit cast by those who believed themselves beyond reproach. And it was Holmes's relentless pursuit of truth that had finally brought that shadow into the light. The city moved on, unaware of the delicate balance restored by a quiet detective and his steadfast companion. Two men who knew that in the end, no secret could truly remain hidden forever. We returned to Baker Street under a grey sky that hung low over London, as though the city itself were burdened by the weight of the truth we now carried. The fire had long since burned low, but Holmes made no move to rekindle it. Instead, he sat quietly in his chair, the unread newspaper beside him, his gaze fixed not on the world outside, but on some distant place within his own formidable mind. I knew better than to interrupt him in such a moment. He was turning it all over. The confession, the real culprit, and what justice meant in the face of such tangled deceit. Finally, he broke the silence. "We have all the pieces, Watson, but the conclusion is not mine to write. The authorities will act, or they will not. But we've illuminated the truth, and that, at the very least, will not be buried." "Do you think Lady Agnes will be prosecuted?" I asked, not without bitterness. Her confession was subtle. Careful, there's no signature, no direct admission. And with her influence, precisely why she wrote it. Holmes said, steepling his fingers beneath his chin, "It was never intended for the courts. It was a calculation, a message to us. A warning that we may reveal what we know, But she is protected. I frowned. Then we've failed. No, Holmes said, his tone sharpening. We haven't failed, Watson. We've exposed a truth that would have remained forever hidden. Ellery, broken as he was, now stands a chance at exoneration. A pawn may yet be freed. And the true architect of the crime, though not in chains, will never sleep easy again. His words carried a grim finality. There would be no dramatic arrest, no courtroom triumph. Lady Agnes, cloaked in privilege and cunning, had outplayed the law. But not Holmes. 2 days later, we received a visit from Inspector Lestrade. He entered briskly, eyes weary. "We've reviewed your findings, Holmes," he said. "The letter, the sequence of manipulations, the testimonies, it's remarkable. But the Crown won't move without something binding. She denies it all." "Naturally." "And Ellery?" Holmes asked. Lestrade hesitated. "He'll be released. No official apology, mind you, but the charges won't stick. Internal mess at the Yard about the premature arrest. Quiet dismissal." I glanced at Holmes, who merely nodded. It was the best we could hope for. But Holmes wasn't finished. Later that evening, he laid out on the table every item, document, and photograph we'd gathered. "Do you remember, Watson," he said, "the silver bookmark in Pembroke's study? The one you thought curious but dismissed as trivial?" "I do," I said. It bore the motto of the Cambridge Rowing Club. Indeed. But Pembroke never rowed nor attended Cambridge. And yet, Lady Agnes's late husband did. The bookmark was not his. It was gifted by a man named Mortimer Ray, a political advisor with known connections to a money laundering scheme uncovered 5 years ago. He turned over a faded letter. This was tucked behind the same bookshelf. Correspondence between Lady Agnes and Ray. She buried it, Watson. Quite literally. A connection to criminal finance, bribery, and the silent funding of her late husband's return to Parliament after scandal. It all began to align. The cover-up, the staged imprisonment, Ellery's silence. Lady Agnes wasn't protecting her son. She was preserving a legacy built on lies. "But Holmes," I said, stunned, "why didn't you give this to Lestrade?" "Because, my dear Watson," he replied, "Lestrade answers to the law. But this," he tapped the letters, "this answers to something higher. The public." The next morning, the London Gazette ran a story penned by an anonymous source. It detailed the quiet corruption surrounding the Pembroke estate, hinting at forged evidence, backroom dealings, and political fraud. Lady Agnes's name was never mentioned directly, but the implications were clear. The public outcry was immediate. Questions were raised in Parliament. Donations were pulled. The family's influence began to crumble, not by the sword of the law, but by the slow erosion of reputation. A week later, a carriage pulled away from the Pembroke estate for the last time. Lady Agnes, pale and composed, departed London indefinitely, her name removed from all social registers. She was never officially charged, never publicly condemned. But she had been unmasked. Back at Baker Street, I watched Holmes pour tea with quiet satisfaction. "You never intended for her to stand trial," I said. "She would have twisted the courtroom into her own theatre," Holmes replied. "But reputation. Ah. That is a mirror she cannot hide from." "And the clues?" I asked. "Those we missed." Holmes turned, his eyes glinting with wry amusement. "You missed the bookmark. The angle of the dust on the cell's interior latch. The reaction when I mentioned the name Mortimer Ray. But more importantly, everyone missed the human element, the pride that compels a person to orchestrate such an elaborate lie, the desperation to preserve a name long after its honor has withered. Then justice has been served." Holmes leaned back in his chair. "Not the kind the courts recognize, perhaps, but the truth has been unearthed, and that in the end is its own verdict. Outside, the city pressed on, indifferent to the secrets it carried in its stones. Another case closed, not with gavel or gallows, but with exposure and consequence. In that, Sherlock Holmes had triumphed once again, not because he was above the law, but because he always saw beneath it. The fog was thick that morning, as though London itself had no desire to reveal what lingered beneath its veil. I walked beside Holmes, neither of us speaking as we passed the gaslit alleyways and silent storefronts. The case was over, in every official sense. Lady Agnes had vanished from public life, Ellery was free, and the Pembroke legacy had been irreparably stained. But in Holmes's silence, I sensed an unease that hadn't yet been laid to rest. We returned to Baker Street, where the faint scent of old tobacco still hung in the air. Holmes sat at his desk, glancing briefly at the stack of unused telegrams, the orderly files now sealed and marked with neat labels. I turned to prepare tea. But before I could finish, he spoke. "Watson, have you considered the ledger?" "The Pembroke family accounts," I replied. "You combed through every line." "Yes, and therein lies the problem. There was one line I dismissed as a clerical error. A payment made 3 weeks before the murder, £2,000 unaccounted for. No pay listed, no service rendered." I paused. Could it have been for silence? Holmes shook his head. Possibly. But there's a deeper inconsistency. The payment was issued by a name we overlooked, James Brentwell, a junior accountant tied to the estate's financial affairs. I assumed he was irrelevant. But why would his name appear only once, and only in connection to an untraceable sum? "What are you suggesting?" Holmes stood and walked to the window, staring out into the grey. "That we may have uncovered only the outer skin of this particular onion. That someone else, unseen and unspoken, played a role we never identified." I frowned, but Lady Agnes confessed. "The manipulation, the staging, the motive, it all fits." Indeed. But when a woman of such meticulous calculation risks everything, she does not leave a single loose end. That ledger line, it is a loose end. Which means either she made a mistake, or someone else was involved. Someone she didn't account for. Or worse, someone she feared. The idea chilled me. After all we'd seen, the notion that a deeper hand remained hidden, unexposed, turned my thoughts uneasy. Holmes, however, had already reached for the correspondence pile, once more, flipping briskly through letters we had deemed irrelevant. "Here," he muttered. "Look at this envelope. Postmarked 2 days before the murder. Return address, Brentwell's flat. But the letter inside is unsigned, and the contents are curious." I read it aloud. "You think you've accounted for everything. But a legacy doesn't belong to those who inherit it, it belongs to those who shape it. Soon, someone will pay what is owed." "Cryptic," I said, handing it back. "But not enough to tie anyone to the crime." Holmes's eyes darkened with thought. "No, but it suggests awareness. Possibly even complicity. What if Brentwell knew about Lady Agnes's scheme, or worse, had a part in orchestrating it? And yet never revealed himself?" I asked. "Sometimes, Watson, the cleverest players are those who never sit at the table. They move the pieces and let others take the fall." We sat in silence again, the fire crackling softly. Holmes leaned forward, elbows on knees, fingers pressed together. "The true mystery, I fear, is not in what we proved, but in what we couldn't. The ledger, the letter, the missing payment. They whisper of something unfinished. A spectre that lingers behind the curtains we pulled back." "You don't think this is over?" I said. Holmes gave a rare, thin smile. "I think this chapter is closed. But the story may yet continue." Days passed. life returned to its rhythms. I visited old patients. Holmes resumed his violin with renewed obsession, and the Pembroke case faded from the headlines. But the ledger never left his desk. One evening, a thin envelope arrived by post. No name, no return address, just a single line typed on old paper. She wasn't the only one who knew how to bury the past. Holmes held it delicately. "A warning?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned the envelope over. In the corner, a faint watermark, an insignia neither of us recognized. "This, Watson," he murmured, "is the beginning of something else." And though we had seen the gavel fall on the Pembroke affair, I felt the familiar tension rise in my chest. A case was closing. But another, perhaps darker, perhaps more complex, had just begun to breathe. As Holmes returned to his files, already searching through old cases and names, I knew better than to question the moment. The world, it seemed, would never quite let him rest. For in the shadows of justice served, a mystery never truly ends.